It's Friday, August 7th, 2020. Welcome back to the Nerd National Communication Center. It's time for the tech news. AT&T and Intel are still struggling. Nvidia still in the hunt to buy ARM. And it's been 20 years since Steve Jobs came out with a very unique computer.
First up in the nerd news is Nvidia is continuing to pursue buying ARM from SoftBank. ARM used to be a private company. It was bought by SoftBank for about $32 billion. So Nvidia is evidently in advanced negotiations. Now remember, the ARM CPU is the most prevalent CPU in the entire world. It far outsells Intel CPUs and AMD CPUs because it's the CPU that goes into billions of smartphones, and it goes into tablets, and Apple Macintoshes are going to be using ARM. Even Microsoft has a version of the Surface Pro that uses the ARM processor. So this could be a really big deal, basically taking Nvidia from a video card company that also makes a few ARM processors to the head of the line. So we'll keep following this. Following up on the Chinese malware built into their tax software, the FBI has issued a warning to U.S. companies that are doing business in China because that tax software, which is mandatory, has Golden Helper and Golden Spy built into it. And to follow up on it and make it even worse, it's not just spying on your computer, it has the ability to search through other computers on your network and use worm-like defects in the security to get onto other systems. So if I was doing business in China mandatory and I had to have that tax software on a computer to send in my tax information to the Chinese government, I would absolutely have that computer air-gapped, not hooked up to anything else on my network, and I would sneaker net the data over to it one way. I would bring the data over on a memory stick, plug it in, and then destroy that memory stick afterwards. I would not take that memory stick back to my other computers because it could have a payload on it. So if you're an authoritarian country, you can do this stuff. You can spy on everybody in your country to see what there's up to, because you have to put the software on your computer. And not only does it snoop that computer, but now it's propagating through the network. So you can read more about this. It's over at ZDNet. So over at Input Mag, there is an article following up on the TikTok saga we have been following, and the Trump administration is giving TikTok basically 45 days to sell their U.S. operations, and Microsoft is very interested in taking this over. Now, if you read this article, Microsoft would host all the data in the United States, and they would up the security of the software to ensure that, quote, Microsoft would ensure that all private data of TikTok's American users is transferred to and remains in the United States. So if this happens, it looks like TikTok in the United States will get a reprieve and Microsoft will get a bump from this. So Microsoft has a history of when they bought these entities, such as LinkedIn, they kind of let them continue to run fairly autonomously, and it's gonna be interesting to see where this ends up, to see whether TikTok gets banned or not. I certainly, if I was doing any kind of business with a business phone or device, I would not have TikTok on it. There's just too many risks, because China has a track record of having companies that have Chinese companies that have nothing to do with the Chinese government, having them add stuff or report their data to the Chinese government. It's just an unacceptable risk if you're doing business in the United States. Over at Ars Technica, got several articles from Ars Technica in this week's tech news, but the decline of AT&T DirecTV continues. They lost basically another 1 million customers. I have a vacation rental property, and unfortunately I'm forced to have DirecTV on it because you can only get satellite TV out there. However, I have located another service I'm going to be going to as soon as this rental season is over. But look at this. They have gone from 25 million TV users in 2018 down to 18.4 million after the latest loss. That's a huge decrease. It's looking more and more like cable TV is the next blockbuster. Now, AT&T has made some moves to try to adapt to the future. They bought HBO Max, and it is up to 4 million subscribers. That has not offset the number of customers they've lost from DirecTV and the AT&T U-verse. And the other thing you got to realize is that cable TV is a lot more expensive than HBO Max. If you look a little bit further in the article, HBO Max is $15 a month, and the average income they're making off cable TV, right here, premium TV, is $124 a month. Basic DirecTV right now is costing me $90 a month. And if I suspend it in the off season, which you're allowed to do with DirecTV, they charge me $7 a month for the privilege of having it suspended. So I can see why they're going downhill here. And I can tell you for a fact from my personal experience that ever since AT&T bought DirecTV, the customer service has gone down and down and down as AT&T strives mightily to match the customer service experience of Comcast. Now, on the other hand, Disney Plus has passed 60 million subscribers, which was their 5-year goal, and they've reached it in the first 8 months. Now, part of the way they did this is Disney actually owns Hulu, and they have a thing right now where you can get Disney Plus, Hulu, and I think ESPN, maybe ESPN Classic, for about 15 or it's less than $20 a month. I'm thinking very strongly about adding that, but I have so much content to watch now with just having Hulu and Netflix that I'm not sure why I'd want to add another streaming service of stuff I can't watch right now. So Disney, I think, understands that cable TV is the next blockbuster, that it's just going to go away, and that people are just going to be buying channels a la carte. Just buying what you want, which is what people have wanted from the cable industry forever. If you're not into sports, why are you paying for sports channels? Why are you paying for the UFO channel, the History Channel, when you don't watch it? So Disney, as opposed to AT&T, seems to be executing and understanding it much better. Much, much better. The next couple articles I want to talk about is really continuing to look at Intel's struggles. This article over at Ars Technica talks about as Intel has tried to move to a 7 nanometer process for chip fabbing. It's slipped at least 6 months. There's been a big shakeup at the company. The person responsible for developing the new chip fabrication process has been sacked or retired or whatever you want to call it. They won't say they fired him, but Intel has been struggling to bring its chip fab processes to the next technology, going from 14 nanometers, that's how far apart on average the electronic components are on the chip, down to 10 nanometers, down to 7 nanometers. So third-party fabs are at 7 nanometers. TSMC is at 7 nanometers. Intel has failed to do this. You can put so many more components on a CPU chip or on a memory chip. Just going from 14 nanometers to 7 nanometers doesn't mean you double. Remember, you've got height and width of the chip. What used to take up a 14 by 14 nanometer square would only take up a 7 by 7 nanometer square. Now, that is 4 times as many components on one chip. So not executing on that is putting them really far behind the competition, to the point that they're looking at buying excess production capacity from TSMC. Now, there might be some extra capacity available because Huawei has been banned in the United States, so they're not doing as much chip fabbing. They're not buying as many electronic chips as they were for their phones because the United States coming down on them. But Intel has just struggled to get across this barrier. They have not executed. When Intel tried to create 5G modems to sell for cell phones, that was way behind schedule, and Apple dumped them basically and settled their lawsuit with Qualcomm, and then Apple ended up buying all the intellectual property for 5G modems from Intel because they want to develop their own native capacity to build that into their chips so they don't have to license it from anybody else. So Intel keeps talking about their 14 nanometer process plus, and then they enhanced it, so it was plus plus, and then they enhanced it, and they enhanced it. So they've really been struggling. So in the short term, next 6 months, a year, if they can't get their fab plants down to 7 nanometers, they're going to have to farm their chip production out to other companies. And that's not anything Intel has ever done. So that just shows you how desperate Intel is. Now, moving on to this article at Extreme Tech, continuing on the same vein, Intel and AMD are fighting for this excess capacity at TSMC, at these fabs, because AMD, the 3rd generation Threadrippers and Ryzens, and the 4th generation are big winners, and AMD is winning a lot of market share, and they need to produce more chips. There are shortages of mobile chips for AMD Ryzen processors because they just can't make enough to meet demand. So Intel, desperate to be able to get down to 7 nanometers, is trying to buy some of this excess capacity that evidently is being freed up because Huawei has, Trump administration has banned TSMC from doing business with Huawei. So this may help Intel to not fall as far behind, but it's just another sign of how desperate Intel is. And next article here, also at Extreme Tech, AMD's market share is the highest it's been since 2012. AMD has really taken a big chunk of the CPU market in the PC world. Now, it's a big share compared to what they've had. It's not a big share overall. So AMD's overall market share is just shy of 20% of the CPU market. And they have been growing and growing and growing since they debuted the Ryzen processors in 2017, and they've executed timely and very strong improvements to the Ryzen line year after year. And to see them getting as strong as they are in the laptop, the notebook market, is also a big thing because there hasn't been a lot of AMDs in the market. Now, where they haven't hit yet is the server market. But this is just another sign of the struggles of Intel. AMD is doing everything right. Intel is fumbling and tripping and falling. So Intel's not going to go out of business in the near future, or probably in the next 5 years, but if they don't get their act together, they're going to be increasingly fighting for a smaller share of a shrinking market as more and more computers are going to be going to the ARM processors instead of the x86 processors. The next article I ran into is over at Wired, and it talks about the silver lining in Apple's very bad iPhone news. And what's very bad iPhone news? Well, it's not that their phones are not extremely popular and very good phones. It's just people are buying phones every 3 to 4 years now instead of every 2 years. So they're not selling as many phones as they used to. I just traded in my iPhone 6, not my iPhone 6S, my iPhone 6 for an iPhone SE 2020, because I ain't paying no $1,000 for a phone. Now, I did pay $500 because I got the 128 gig model, but I had been holding off upgrading that phone for about a year, waiting for the iPhone SE 2020 is what they ended up calling it, but it's really the iPhone SE 2 to come out. I like that size of phone, and I just am not interested in a $1,000 phone. I like to keep my phones for 3 years. I was able to keep my old phone for 4 years because Apple had the $29 battery replacement deal. So as soon as I got a new battery, having to charge in the middle of the day went away. The phone was working okay. In the last year, it got to where when it was trying to use Google Maps, it was just getting so hot in the car. I quit using Google Maps, and Google Maps was running too slow. Apple Maps was running okay with CarPlay, but the phone was still getting very hot to the point that I put my phone in the air conditioning vent to keep it cool when I was using Maps with that old phone, because it was having to peg the CPU out at 100%, all the cores. Now that I've got a new phone, it doesn't have to work nearly as hard to be able to run the Maps program when I'm in my car, because of course it's a much more modern processor. So you're not getting the dramatic advancements in technology with cell phones that we used to get. The camera is not so dramatically better that we've got to have a new camera. The CPU power is not so dramatically better that we've got to have it. So get your money's worth out of your phones. They're very expensive, unless it's just your I've got to have it, it's my showpiece, I like having the latest and greatest technology. And I have some friends that are like that. They buy a new iPhone or they buy the new Samsung every year because they want to have that flagship, high-tech, cutting-edge device. So this is cutting into all the smartphone makers' income because people are just not replacing the phones as fast. And speaking of phone technology, also at Wired, I don't want their exclusive 1-year offer for $5. The next generation of Gorilla Glass is getting ready to come out, and it's going to be more scratch resistant. They have pretty much got the glass hard enough where dropping your phone is not going to crack it, but since people are keeping their phones longer, they're getting micro scratches on the top of them, and people don't like that. So the next generation of Gorilla Glass will be an improvement. It will be more scratch resistant and just as shatter resistant. So you can go over to Wired and read the full article on this. All right, my last foray over to Ars Technica for the nerd news this time is very interesting article about how Amazon used its monopolistic powers to crush the competition. When you have a large monopoly with deep pockets and you have a competitor that does not have deep pockets, you can sell your product at a loss and eat the money. So Amazon allegedly lost $200 million in the diaper market to drive diapers.com out of business. This, to me, is an illegal behavior. So it just is very disappointing to see this kind of behavior from these large companies. Now, I'm not even going to try to say the name of this company right here. I don't think I can pronounce it. But they figured out a way to sell diapers online, to package them smaller and to cut their shipping costs. And they were significantly underpricing what you could buy it for on Amazon and still make a profit. Well, Amazon saw this as a threat and basically started underselling them, okay, to drive them to the bargaining table. Basically said, we're going to drive you out of business if you do not let us buy you out now. If you don't let us buy you out now, you're going to be worth nothing. So, predictably, after Amazon started undercutting them in price and bought them out, guess what happened to the price of diapers on Amazon.com? It went back up to the original prices. So, Amazon came up with this Amazon Mom program and offered free shipping and lower prices that just happened to be just a little bit lower than diapers.com. And Amazon just basically said, let us buy you now or it's just going to get worse. But it is a monopolistic process to undersell your opponents to force them into bankruptcy. Of course, Amazon said they had been planning this all along, blah, 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 blah. But to me, you don't want to let companies get too big because they do these kind of things. My last article is over at Wired. It was 20 years ago that Steve Jobs built the coolest computer ever. There it is, the Power Mac G4 Cube. Look at that, made out of acrylic plastic, no fans. The air came in the bottom and rose through the top. The problem was the computer had an extremely premium price, but only mid-range performance. So basically, Jobs fell in love with it like it was a work of art. But the high-end tech enthusiasts, if they were going to spend that much money on a computer, they wanted high-end performance. And it was not high-end performance. Quote, we have made the coolest computer ever. The Cube. A little bit further down in the article, let me read you this quote. I admitted it was gorgeous, but I had a question for him. Earlier in the conversation, he had drawn Apple's product matrix, 4 squares representing laptop and desktop, high and low end. Since returning to Apple in 1997, he had filled in all the quadrants with the iMac, Power Mac, iBook, and PowerBook. The Cube violated the wisdom of his product plan. It didn't have the power features of a high-end Power Mac, like slots or a huge storage. And it was way more expensive than the low-end iMac, even before you spent for a necessary separate display required of Cube owners. Knowing I was risking his ire, I asked him, just who's going to buy this? Jobs didn't miss a beat. That's easy, he said. A ton of people who are pros. Every designer is going to buy it. I'm skipping along a little bit. That didn't happen. For one thing, the price was prohibitive. By the time you bought the display, it was almost 3 times the price of an iMac and even more than some Power Macs. By and large, people didn't spend their art budget on computers. So the G4 Cube was gorgeous. Probably one of the most beautiful computers ever built. But it sold fewer than 150,000 units 20 years ago. The Power Mac G4 Cube, released in 2000, discontinued in 2001. But what a beautiful machine. Well, that's the tech news for this week. I hope you enjoyed the nerd news. I'll come out with another one in about 2 weeks. If you liked it, please subscribe and hit that bell so you'll be notified of the next news. Take care.